Tax increase. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Was that a prelude to my debate? I certainly can appreciate time, so I'll try and be as brief as I can. I'm property tax increase for 2013 be less than or equal to 1.5%.
Motion is accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now I've given you each thank you, Mr. Belke. Mr. Belke's got a PowerPoint slide presentation for us on the screen. And I've handed you out a copy of that in paper format, and I'll go through this as quickly as I can. This first slide is simply a history for St. Albert of our tax rates from 2000 to 2012, our utility rates from 2005 to 2012, and the consumer price index is on the right from 2001 to 2012. The incomplete data is not there as I could not find it. As you can see, we've had a range of property tax increases over the years, with some higher and some lower. Nothing's completely out of line, but as you can see, it is substantially higher than inflation in most years. And if you look to the utilities column, it is quite a bit more than inflation. Now, just a little bit of an explanation you may be wondering here. 2001, the negative 3%, that's kind of an interesting story. It took me a while to find out. That year there was a really low budget, roughly starting out about 1%, but what did occur in that year is the charge that goes on natural gas, the franchise fee for that year was increased substantially, so that led to a negative 3%, and that is a legitimate figure. 2005 is the start of the 100-year utility rate model, and so that's why there was the 15% that year, and I could not find any rates for earlier than that. Now, the point I'm just trying to make with this slide is that the consumer price index is a pretty good comparison for average person's wages. And our taxes and utility rates have been above that for most of those years. Next slide, please. Now, this is the average property tax on a 1,200 square foot bungalow, excluding the education portion of the taxation. So for St. Albert in 2010, that would have been about $2,408, and the next closest comparator would have been about $1,600, $1,605 to be precise. This information comes from the City of Edmonton Planning Department, their 2010 annual rates and service fee charges, figure 8. And this is simply a sample home, 25 to 30-year-old detached 3-bedroom bungalow, with the main floor area of 1,200 square feet, finished basement, double-car garage, and a 6,000 square foot lot. So I picked this, not because it's high or low, but simply it's a decent approximation for many of the homes that are in St. Albert. And just visually you can see there's a little bit of a difference. Now, that certainly doesn't mean that we don't receive value for the money that we expend and collect, but it just does give you a good indication as to how we line up to many of these other municipalities in the region, and as you can see, we're clearly above in that category in this comparison. Next slide, please. So why is this? Well, we've talked at length about the tax split, and the reason is that some of these other municipalities within the comparator have more business tax assessment than we do. Currently in St. Albert, our tax split is 89-11, meaning that 89% of our revenue comes from residential and 11% comes from non-residential growth. However, this is not the only reason why our taxation is higher than other municipalities. One quick example is Morinville, which has a 94-6 tax split, and there are other communities similar to that. So our spending is higher than average. We're not the highest in most categories, but we're not the lowest either, and we're near the top. So basically, we certainly don't have the best assessment base, and we do spend higher than average, and that's the fiscal gap that occurs, and that's essentially why you see that we're higher than other places in the region. Now, I guess, why is that? Well, we do offer additional services in St. Albert. We do have superior services in some areas, and some services simply cost more and deliver less. Another factor that comes into line is that we live very close to the City of Edmonton, and at times we fail to take advantage of that proximity by taking advantage of some of the services that are just next door. Next slide, please. So why should I care if fees and taxes are high in St. Albert? Well, obviously the first thing is the average person living in our community has less money to spend each tax year. And of course, we all know that cost matters to voters. Property taxes are a regressive tax, meaning that those that cannot necessarily afford to pay are taxed the same that those that can. So it's not like an income tax where if you make more money or charge more. You can have situations where an elderly family or an elderly individual owns a home and their income is not nearly as high. And if we think back to the first slide, the average family in St. Albert is losing a little bit of ground to inflation every year when our taxes surpass inflation. We have to offer a value proposition to the residents of St. Albert. So the money that we collect always has to be spent wisely. And we have to think about what is the role of government? What are we here to do? Traditionally, the role of government was to provide services to property. Interesting quick statistic, if you look in some municipalities in Quebec, non-residents are allowed to vote if they own property. And so today we offer a lot of services that are not directly related to property. And that goes back to how you view the role of a municipal government. So is the role of municipal government simply to provide better value to residents for their dollar through economies of scope and scale? I feel that it is. High taxes skews the city towards one type of resident and changes the demographics of our city. For example, we have fewer old people, less families, and more younger, wealthier families with fewer children. The single biggest reason, though, is that taxation is one of the largest things that affects the value of people's homes, and that's the largest capital asset most people will have in their life. So those are some key reasons to examine. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick slide of why people live where they live and why people live here. Now, I did some research online and found some various surveys done by different municipalities, and these are some of the top reasons that people stated. So you can look at those and think about it, but some of those things we can affect as a municipal government and some things we can't. We can certainly affect taxes, but we can't affect our location. We can do some things around safety, but we can't do much around whether someone is close to family or friends. Now, location, there's many things that go into that. Close to work, close to school, close to amenities. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Next slide, please. So essentially, people live where they see value. They look at a basket of reasons like that, and they're going to live where it lines up best for them. Now, in the capital region, which is where we all reside, and I'll conclude the 24 municipalities in the capital region, we have a public choice model in delivering services through municipal government. Basically, what that means is people can vote with their feet. We've got a lot of competing municipalities, and so people, if you look within the 1-hour commuter shed of Edmonton, they can live basically wherever they want and commute. So we're in a competitive marketplace. If we were in Fort McMurray or High Level or even Calgary, where there was just one municipality, perhaps, my opinion would be different. In fact, it probably would. But we're in a competitive marketplace and competing with all these other municipalities for residents, business, and everything else. So people need to see value in everything that's being done. And since we are clearly one of the higher cost places to live in the region, can we create a lot of value by increasing that cost more? Or can we create more value for residents by going in the opposite direction and being more in line with other communities within the region? So I'll ask you just a rhetorical question. What new spending could we provide today that will make people move here? I don't know how much there is of that. Next slide, please. So economies of scale, I mentioned that earlier. That's one thing that we can do to improve our value proposition within the city of St. Albert. So what economies of scale are is when it becomes cheaper for the city to deliver some services rather than the individual resident to do it on their own. The overall cost decreases by centralization. So think the St. Albert Public Library. It's cheaper for us to offer books to residents as a whole than us each going home and creating our individual libraries. There's an economies of scale that exists there. So before a service is delivered, when we're looking at a spending decision, I would suggest that we try to determine if economies of scale exist or not. Next slide, please. So what is value? I've created, just put this concept up there, the 90-10 concept. Percentage is abstract, but the concept is tangible. And essentially what that means is we have provided all the basic services within this community to a high standard that everybody appreciates. So all the new ideas that we come up with cater to a smaller percentage of residents, say 10%. The unfortunate part is that when you deliver a service through the city, 100% have to pay. So that means that whenever we have a new idea or a new concept that costs money, 10% will be happy and 90% it'll be a service that they do not need or want. So economies of scale versus unwanted services. Most spending programs benefit 10%, but 100% pay. All services we do not need to provide or diseconomies of scale are present. So that's one thing you want to think about. People need to see value for the price that they're paying. So at what point do higher taxes become an impediment to value within the city? That's ultimately the question I'm asking as I go through these slides here. Next slide, please.